I never thought I'd be the one telling this kind of story. The kind where someone you love betrays you in the worst possible way, where your world crashes down around you in an instant. But here I am. They say hindsight is 20/20. Looking back, the signs were all there. The late nights at work, the sudden password changes on her phone, the way she'd tense up when Mark's name came up in conversation. My best friend since college. The guy who stood as my best man when Sarah and I got married 4 years ago. The same man who helped us move into our dream house just 8 months ago. Our dream house. The Victorian-style home with the wraparound porch that Sarah and I had saved for years to afford. The house with the perfect study where I'd write my novel someday. With the nursery we planned to fill in a couple of years. The house that I now walked through alone. My footsteps echoing on hardwood floors that had once felt warm and inviting, but now seemed to amplify the emptiness. I wasn't supposed to be home that Tuesday afternoon. My flight back from the Chicago conference had been canceled due to mechanical issues, and I managed to get on an earlier one instead. I texted Sarah that I'd be home by 3, but she never responded. I assumed she was busy at work. She'd been busy at work. A lot lately. The house was quiet when I arrived, but her car was in the driveway, which was strange. More strange was Mark's SUV parked across the street. My first thought was innocent. Maybe she'd taken the day off sick and Mark had stopped by to check on her. That would be like him, always the caring friend. I remember setting my suitcase down in the foyer, calling out Sarah's name. No answer. The house felt different somehow. There was an energy in the air, a stillness that felt wrong. I called out again as I climbed the stairs, hearing faint sounds coming from our bedroom. When people talk about life-changing moments, they often describe time slowing down. That's not how it happened for me. Time accelerated. Everything moved too fast, too brutally efficient in its destruction of my reality. The bedroom door wasn't completely closed. Through the gap, I saw clothing scattered across the floor. Her blouse, a pair of men's jeans I didn't recognize, but somehow knew belonged to Mark. I heard Sarah's laugh, that specific laugh she reserved for moments of intimacy, followed by Mark's voice, low and gentle. We should tell him soon. It's not fair to keep living like this. My body moved on autopilot. I pushed the door open. There they were, tangled in our bed, her head on his chest, his fingers playing with her hair. The sheets I had bought for our anniversary partially covering their naked bodies. The afternoon sun filtering through the curtains illuminated them in a soft glow that made the scene even more surreal. Their expressions when they saw me, I'll never forget them. Sarah's face drained of color, her mouth forming a perfect O of shock. Mark looked, guilty isn't the right word, caught. He looked caught, not guilty. There's a difference. James, Sarah whispered, clutching the sheet to her chest. You're supposed to be in Chicago. Of all the things she could have said in that moment, she chose that. Not I'm sorry, or this isn't what it looks like, or any of the other cliches. Just a statement of fact. I was supposed to be in Chicago, and I wasn't, and that was the problem. That's when I realized how long this had been going on. This wasn't a first-time mistake. This was routine. This was comfortable. This was an affair with established patterns and expectations. How long? I asked, my voice so calm it frightened even me. Mark started to speak, but Sarah cut him off. James, please, let's talk about this. How long? The calm evaporated, replaced by a roar that came from somewhere primitive inside me. They exchanged glances, another intimacy that didn't include me, before Sarah answered. 8 months. 8 months. Since we moved into the dream house. Perhaps even before. My mind raced through a slideshow of memories. Mark helping us move in, staying late after everyone else left, the three of us toasting with champagne in the kitchen. Was it happening even then? The housewarming party where Sarah and Mark had disappeared for 20 minutes to find more wine. The weekend I went to visit my parents and Mark volunteered to keep Sarah company because she couldn't get off work. I started laughing. It bubbled up from my chest uncontrollably, this broken sound that scared all three of us. James, you're scaring me, Sarah said, pulling the sheet tighter. I'm scaring you? I repeated, the laughter dying as suddenly as it had appeared. That's rich, Sarah. Really fucking rich. Mark finally found his voice. Man, this isn't how we wanted you to find out. Shut up, I said quietly, and he did. Just shut the fuck up, Mark. 15 years of friendship, and you're screwing my wife in my bed while I'm supposedly out of town. You don't get to speak right now. The room fell silent except for the sound of my breathing, which seemed unnaturally loud. I looked around at the bedroom we had decorated together, at the photographs on the wall. Our wedding day, our honeymoon in Bali, a camping trip with friends, including Mark. Get out, I said. Both of you. Get dressed and get the fuck out of my house. Sarah slid out of bed, keeping the sheet wrapped around her. James, please, this is my house too. We need to talk about this like adults. Something inside me went very still and cold. Like adults? Adults don't fuck their husband's best friend for 8 months behind his back, Sarah. Adults don't betray 15 years of friendship. So no, we're not going to talk about this like adults because you haven't been acting like one. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Where am I supposed to go? I looked at Mark, who was pulling on his pants, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. I don't know and I don't care. Go with him. You've been so comfortable in his bed, you can stay there. That's not fair, she said, tears starting to form. Fair? The word tasted bitter. You want to talk to me about fair? Was it fair to come home to find my wife and best friend in my bed? Was it fair to realize that for 8 months you've both been laughing at me behind my back? It wasn't like that, Mark said, now fully dressed but looking disheveled. We never meant to hurt you. I turned to him slowly. But you did it anyway, didn't you? You just didn't want me to find out so you wouldn't have to deal with the consequences. He had no answer for that. I stepped back from the doorway. You have 30 minutes to pack whatever you absolutely need. The rest we'll figure out later. But in 30 minutes, if either of you are still here, I'm calling the police and reporting trespassers. You can't do that, Sarah said, outrage replacing some of her shock. My name is on the deed too. Try me, I said. 30 minutes. I walked downstairs, my legs somehow supporting me, despite feeling like they might give way at any moment. In the kitchen, I poured myself a scotch, the expensive kind I'd been saving for a special occasion. I suppose this qualified in its own twisted way. Upstairs, I could hear them moving around, Sarah crying, Mark mumbling something to her. I drank my scotch and poured another, watching the clock on the microwave tick forward. 25 minutes left. 20. 15. When they came downstairs, Sarah had a suitcase and 2 large tote bags. Mark carried another bag that I recognized as the overnight bag Sarah took on business trips. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Sarah stopped in front of me, her makeup smeared from crying. This isn't right, James. We need to talk about this. About the house, about everything. We will, I said. But not today. Not tomorrow. Maybe not for a while. Right now, I need you gone. I'll call you, she said as if we just had a minor disagreement. Don't. She looked like she wanted to say more, but Mark put his hand on her arm and guided her toward the door. As they reached it, I called out, Mark. He turned, hope flashing across his face. Hope that I might forgive him, that our friendship could somehow survive this. The key, I said, holding out my hand. He stared at me for a moment before reaching into his pocket and pulling out his keychain. He removed the key to our house, the key I'd given him in case of emergencies, and placed it in my palm without a word. I watched from the front window as they loaded her things into his SUV. I watched as he opened the passenger door for her, as she got in without looking back at the house. I watched until they drove away, until they turned the corner and disappeared. Then I locked the door, closed all the blinds, went upstairs and stripped the bed. I stuffed the sheets into a garbage bag, took them outside and set them on fire in the metal fire pit on the back patio. I stood there watching them burn until there was nothing left but ashes, and still, I felt nothing. No relief, no catharsis, just a hollow emptiness where my life used to be. That night, I slept in the guest room, staring at the ceiling until dawn broke, trying to figure out how I'd missed the signs, how I'd been so completely blindsided. And somewhere in those dark hours, as the numbness began to recede and the pain started seeping in, something else took root as well. They thought they could take everything from me. My marriage, my friendship, my trust, my future. But they hadn't taken the house, our dream house, my house now, and they wouldn't. That much I promised myself as the first light of a new day filtered through unfamiliar curtains. They had taken enough. The first week passed in a blur of alcohol and sleeplessness. I called in sick to work, using vacation days I'd been saving for the trip to Europe that Sarah and I had planned for our 5th anniversary. Another future erased. Sarah called repeatedly. I didn't answer. She texted apologies, explanations, pleas to talk. I read them all but responded to none. Mark called once. I blocked his number. On the 8th day, when the whiskey no longer dulled the pain and the silence of the house had become its own form of torture, I forced myself to shower, to shave, to look like a human being again. I drove to work and sat through meetings in a fog, nodding at appropriate intervals, speaking when spoken to, functioning on autopilot. My colleagues knew something was wrong, but were too polite or too uncomfortable to ask. I was grateful for their distance. After work, I met with a lawyer. Caroline Winters came highly recommended for divorce cases, particularly messy ones involving infidelity. Her office was sleek but comfortable, her handshake firm, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Tell me everything," she said after I'd settled into the chair across from her desk. I did. The conference, the early return, the discovery, the 8 months of deception. The dream house we'd bought together, both our names on the deed but with my down payment making up the majority of the initial investment, inheritance money from my grandparents that I'd been saving for years. "And what do you want out of this divorce?" Caroline asked when I finished. "The house," I said without hesitation. "She can have whatever else she wants, furniture, cars, investments, but I want the house." Caroline made a note. "Anything else?" I thought about it. "Yes, I want everyone to know why we're divorcing. I don't want her to control the narrative, to make me out to be the villain. I want the truth on record." "That's certainly doable," she said, "though I should warn you that divorce proceedings can get ugly, especially when infidelity's involved." "Are you prepared for that?" I met her gaze steadily. "I didn't ask for ugly. I didn't ask for any of this. But I'm not going to roll over and lose everything I've worked for." She nodded, a hint of approval in her expression. "In that case, let's talk strategy. Virginia is a fault divorce state, which works in our favor given the circumstances. Adultery is grounds for divorce, and while it doesn't automatically mean you get everything, it can certainly influence property division, especially if we can prove that her infidelity led to the breakdown of the marriage." "I have texts," I said, "from both of them. Apologies that essentially confirm what happened." "Good, Neran. Yeah, good. That's a start. We'll also want to gather any financial records related to the house purchase, particularly documentation of your inheritance being used for the down payment. That will strengthen our claim for the house." For the next hour, we discussed the process, the timeline, what to expect. Caroline was thorough, explaining each step, each potential obstacle. By the time I left her office, I had a plan. Not just a legal strategy, but something to focus on besides the constant replay of finding them together. On the drive home, Sarah called again. This time I answered. "James," she said, her voice breaking with relief. "Thank you for picking up. I've been so worried." "What do you want, Sarah?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, detached and formal. "I want to talk. Please. Can we meet somewhere? I've retained a lawyer, Caroline Winters. Have your attorney contact her." A pause. "A lawyer? James, don't you think we should try to work through this ourselves first? Without getting lawyers involved?" I laughed, a short, harsh sound. Work through this? There's nothing to work through, Sarah. You slept with my best friend for 8 months. In our bed. In our home. What exactly do you think we can work through? I made a terrible mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or buying the wrong brand of coffee. What you did was a choice. A series of choices made day after day for 8 months. Please, James. I know you're hurt. You don't know anything about how I feel. I cut her off. You gave up the right to know my feelings when you decided our marriage vows meant nothing to you. She started crying then. Soft sobs that once would have broken my heart. Now they just made me tired. "I still love you," she whispered between sobs. The words hung in the air between us, meaningless sounds that might as well have been in a foreign language for all the sense they made to me now. "Have your lawyer contact mine," I repeated and ended the call. At home, in my house, I sat on the porch swing Sarah had insisted we needed. The one she said would be perfect for summer evenings, with glasses of wine and quiet conversation. I looked out at the street, at the neighboring houses with their warm lights and families inside, and felt the vastness of my aloneness. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "James, it's Mark. Please hear me out. What happened between Sarah and me, it wasn't planned. It just happened. I know that's no excuse. I know I betrayed you in the worst way possible, but you're my oldest friend. I can't bear the thought of losing that friendship forever. Please just talk to me." I stared at the message for a long time, memories flashing through my mind. Mark and me in college, pulling all-nighters before exams, road trips during summer breaks, being his wingman at bars, him standing beside me at my wedding, clapping me on the back and saying, "You got a good one, buddy." I deleted the message without responding and blocked the number. That night, I dreamed of the house empty and echoing, my footsteps following me from room to room like a ghost. I woke up at 3 a.m., sweating and disoriented, reaching for Sarah before remembering she wasn't there, would never be there again. Unable to get back to sleep, I went downstairs to the kitchen and made coffee. As I waited for it to brew, I noticed a small crack in one of the decorative tiles behind the stove. A flaw Sarah had pointed out when we first viewed the house. One of many small imperfections that made up the character of an older home. "We'll fix it someday," she had said, squeezing my hand. "Make it perfect." Standing there in the pre-dawn darkness, I realized I didn't want to fix the crack. I wanted the imperfection. I wanted every flaw, every creaky floorboard, every drafty window. They were part of the house's story, its history, and now they were part of mine. I took my coffee into the living room and sat in the dark, thinking about the future I had planned versus the one I now faced. All those dreams, children running through the halls, holidays with extended family, growing old together in this house, had vanished overnight. In their place was, what? Emptiness? Loneliness? A hollow victory of keeping the house but losing everything else? No, I decided as the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows. Not emptiness. Possibility. This house wouldn't be a mausoleum to a failed marriage. It would be something else. Something mine. I just had to figure out what that meant. 2 weeks after discovering Sarah and Mark's betrayal, I received my first formal communication from Sarah's lawyer. She wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss property division and terms of the divorce. Caroline advised me to agree to the meeting, but to let her do most of the talking. "They'll try to establish that the house should be sold and the proceeds split," Caroline said during our prep session. "Sarah's lawyer will argue that regardless of who contributed more to the down payment, you both own the property equally as it was acquired during the marriage." "And our counter?" I asked. "Will argue that the inheritance money used for the down payment should be considered separate property, not marital property. We'll also emphasize the impact of her infidelity, particularly the psychological impact of her conducting the affair in the marital home." The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Caroline's office. I took the entire day off work, unable to focus on anything else. When I arrived, Caroline greeted me with a reassuring smile and led me into a conference room where Sarah and her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman named Rebecca Daniels, were already waiting. Seeing Sarah across the table hit me harder than I expected. She looked thinner, paler, with dark circles under her eyes partially concealed by makeup. For a moment, a flash of concern went through me. Was she taking care of herself? Before I remembered that her well-being was no longer my responsibility. "Mr. Callahan," Rebecca began after introductions had been made. "First, let me say that my client deeply regrets the circumstances that have led us here today. She has expressed a desire to make this process as amicable as possible." Caroline smiled thinly. "That's commendable. My client also wishes to avoid unnecessary conflict. However, he is firm on certain points, particularly regarding the marital home." Rebecca nodded. "Yes, I understand that's a sticking point. Mrs. Callahan recognizes Mr. Callahan's emotional attachment to the home, but legally speaking, it's jointly owned marital property. We propose selling the house and dividing the proceeds equally." "That won't be happening," Caroline said firmly. "My client contributed his separate inheritance funds for the majority of the down payment." Furthermore, Mrs. Callahan's admitted infidelity with Mr. Callahan's best friend, conducted in the marital home, has caused significant emotional distress. We believe any court would take these factors into consideration when determining equitable distribution. Sarah flinched at the mention of her affair, her eyes darting to me before looking away quickly. Rebecca maintained her professional demeanor. "While we don't dispute the circumstances of the separation, Virginia law doesn't automatically penalize infidelity in property division. The house was purchased jointly, both names are on the deed, and both parties have contributed to the mortgage payments." "True," Caroline acknowledged. "But courts do have discretion when determining what constitutes equitable distribution. Given Mr. Callahan used his inheritance, which would normally be considered separate property, to fund the majority of the down payment, and given Mrs. Callahan's misconduct occurred in the home itself, we believe we have a strong case for Mr. Callahan retaining the property with appropriate compensation to Mrs. Callahan for her share." As the lawyers continued to debate, I found myself watching Sarah. She kept her eyes down, occasionally making notes or whispering to her lawyer. Only once did she look directly at me, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't the remorse or shame I expected, but something like resentment, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Perhaps we could explore a buyout option," Rebecca suggested eventually. Mr. Callahan could purchase Mrs. Callahan's share of the equity in the home. That might be workable, Caroline replied, glancing at me for confirmation. I nodded slightly. However, we would need to agree on a fair valuation that takes into account the circumstances we've discussed. What about everything else? Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice smaller than I remembered. The furniture, the art, the wedding gifts? You can have it all, I said before Caroline could respond. Everything except the house and my personal belongings. Sarah looked startled. Everything? But, I don't want anything that reminds me of us, I said. Just the house. Rebecca leaned over to whisper something to Sarah, who shook her head slightly before addressing me again. And what about Mark's friendship? Are you throwing that away too? The conference room went silent. Caroline tensed beside me, clearly uncertain about where this was going. Mark's friendship, I repeated slowly. You're asking if I'm throwing away my friendship with the man who slept with my wife for 8 months? Sarah had the decency to blush, but she pressed on. He's been your friend for 15 years, James. People make mistakes. This meeting is about property division, not relationship counseling. Caroline interjected smoothly. Let's stay on topic. But I was already leaning forward, my hands flat on the table. Mark isn't a mistake I need to forgive, Sarah. He's a choice I need to remove from my life. Just like you. Rebecca cleared her throat. Perhaps we should take a short break. Caroline agreed, and she led me out to a small break room where she closed the door. Are you okay? She asked. We can reschedule if this is too difficult. I took a deep breath. I'm fine. I just wasn't expecting her to bring up Mark. She's trying to get under your skin, to make you emotional so you'll be more likely to concede on the house. Caroline handed me a cup of water. Don't take the bait. I nodded, taking a sip. I won't, but I meant what I said about the furniture and stuff. She can have it all. I'll replace everything. Caroline studied me for a moment. That's actually not a bad strategy. It shows you're being reasonable about most assets, which strengthens our position on the house. But are you sure? Some of those items must have sentimental value. I thought about the furniture we'd picked out together, the art we'd collected, the wedding china still in its boxes because we were saving it for special occasions. All of it tainted now by the knowledge of their betrayal. I'm sure, I said. None of it matters without the house. When we returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted slightly. Sarah seemed more subdued, and Rebecca's approach was more conciliatory. My client appreciates your flexibility regarding the personal property, Rebecca said. She's willing to explore the buyout option for the house, provided we can agree on fair market value and terms. The rest of the meeting was devoted to establishing a framework for the property division. I would buy out Sarah's share of the house based on a professional appraisal, minus an adjustment for my inheritance contribution. Sarah would get most of the furniture and household items. We would split our investments and savings according to a formula Caroline proposed. By the end of the 3-hour meeting, we had the outline of a settlement. It wasn't final. There were details to be worked out, paperwork to be filed, but it was progress. As we stood to leave, Sarah approached me while our lawyers were gathering their materials. James, she said quietly, thank you for being reasonable about everything except the house. I understand why it's important to you. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since discovering her betrayal. The woman I had loved, had planned to grow old with, had trusted completely. I searched for some remnant of those feelings, some echo of the connection we'd shared, but found only a hollow space where love used to be. It's not about the house, I said finally. It's about having something that's just mine, something neither of you can take from me. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I never meant to take anything from you, James. What happened with Mark? Don't, I cut her off. Don't try to explain it again. I don't care anymore why it happened. I only care about what happens next. And what is that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I moved forward, without either of you. Caroline appeared at my side then, effectively ending the conversation. She guided me out of the conference room and through the reception area to the elevator. You did well in there, she said as we waited. Staying calm even when she tried to provoke you was exactly the right approach. I nodded, still processing the interaction with Sarah. Is it always this civilized? Divorce, I mean. Caroline laughed softly. Rarely. Consider yourself lucky if it stays this way. But be prepared, the calm often comes before the storm. Once reality sets in, when she realizes you're serious about keeping the house, things might get more contentious. I can handle contentious, I said as the elevator arrived. I just want it over with. As I drove home, to my house, I thought about what Caroline had said. The calm before the storm. I wondered what form that storm would take and whether I was truly prepared for it. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next day, I woke to a series of texts from mutual friends, all variations of the same question. Is it true? Are you and Sarah getting divorced because you cheated? For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. I reread the messages, trying to make sense of them. Then my phone rang. Alex, one of my oldest friends from high school, who had also become friends with Sarah over the years. What the hell is going on? He demanded when I answered. Sarah's telling everyone you cheated on her with some woman from your office, that she caught you, that you're trying to screw her over in the divorce. None of that is true. I interrupted, my voice calm despite the rage building inside me. She's the one who cheated. With Mark. I caught them in our bed. Silence on the other end. Then holy shit. Mark? You're Mark? Best man at your wedding, Mark? The very same. Jesus Christ. Alex exhaled heavily. That's... Fuck, man, I'm sorry. But why is Sarah telling everyone it was you who cheated? Because she's trying to control the narrative. I said, recalling Caroline's warning about the calm before the storm. She wants people to sympathize with her, to take her side. Well, it's working. Half our friends think you're the bad guy here. What about the other half? Alex hesitated. They're reserving judgment. Look, Sarah's been very convincing. She's got the whole wounded wife act down pat. Crying, saying she tried to make it work, but you refused counseling, that you're being vindictive about the house to punish her. The injustice of it burned in my chest. After everything she'd done, she was now trying to destroy my reputation, to turn our friends against me. Tell them the truth, I said. If they ask, tell them what really happened. I will, Alex promised. And for what it's worth, I never believed it. Not for a second. You're not that guy. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. So this was the storm Caroline had warned me about. Sarah was going scorched earth, trying to isolate me socially, to pressure me through our mutual friends. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible, yet she was positioning herself as the victim. I called Caroline and explained the situation. Unfortunately, this isn't unusual. She sighed. It's a common tactic, especially when one party feels they're losing control of the situation. She's trying to build social pressure against you, hoping you'll give in on the house to make the rumors stop. What should I do? Don't engage publicly. Don't post angry denials on social media or get into arguments with friends who believe her. That just feeds the drama. Instead, be calm and truthful with those who ask directly. The truth will come out eventually. And in the meantime, I just let her assassinate my character? In the meantime, we push to finalize the divorce as quickly as possible. The longer this drags on, the more opportunity she has to escalate. I'll contact Rebecca today and press for a quick resolution. After hanging up, I found myself pacing the house, anger and indignation building with each step. The unfairness of it all, not just the betrayal, but now this public smear campaign, made me want to lash out, to expose Sarah and Mark for what they really were. But that wouldn't help. It would just make me look vindictive, playing right into Sarah's narrative. I needed to be smarter than that. I sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook and began to write. Everything I knew about the affair, dates, times, text messages I'd saved, observations from friends who had seen them together. I wasn't sure what I would do with this information yet, but documenting it felt productive, a small act of reclaiming control. My phone continued to buzz throughout the day. More friends asking questions, expressing concern, some offering support, others clearly testing the waters to see if Sarah's version of events was true. I responded to each one the same way. Calm, factual, without vitriol. Yes, Sarah and I were divorcing. No, I had not cheated. Yes, she had been having an affair with Mark. No, I didn't want to discuss the details. By evening, I was emotionally exhausted but strangely clearer in my resolve. This was the battle Sarah had chosen. And while I wouldn't fight it on her terms, I wouldn't surrender either. The next morning brought a new development. An email from Rebecca Daniels, Mr. Callahan. My client has instructed me to inform you that she is withdrawing her agreement to the settlement framework discussed in our meeting. She believes the proposed terms are inequitable and do not adequately reflect her contributions to the marriage and the marital home. Additionally, Mrs. Callahan has indicated that she intends to return to the marital home this weekend to collect personal belongings. Please ensure her access to the property. Regards, Rebecca Daniels. I forwarded the email to Caroline, who called me minutes later. She's escalating, Caroline said without preamble. This is a direct response to you not backing down after her character assassination attempt. Can she do this? Just withdraw from our agreement? Technically, yes. We didn't sign anything binding yet, just outlined a framework. But it's a negotiating tactic designed to put pressure on you. And her coming to the house? Caroline paused. That's trickier. Legally, she still has a right to access the property since she's on the deed. We could try to get a temporary order restricting her access, but without evidence of potential harm or property destruction, it's unlikely a judge would grant it. So I have to let her in? For now, yes, but document everything. Be present when she's there, have a witness if possible, and record what she takes. If possible, try to agree on a specific time and have it in writing. I rub my temples, feeling a headache forming. What if I'm not home? Change the locks and provide her with a new key through her attorney. That way, you maintain some control over when she can access the property. After hanging up, I immediately called a locksmith and scheduled them to come that afternoon. Then I responded to Rebecca's email, copying Caroline. Miss Daniels, I am disappointed to hear that Mrs. Callahan is withdrawing from our discussed settlement framework. I remain committed to a fair resolution that recognizes my significant contribution to the down payment on our home. Regarding Mrs. Callahan's intention to collect personal belongings, I request that this be scheduled in advance at a mutually convenient time. I will be changing the locks for security purposes and will provide Mrs. Callahan with a new key through your office for a scheduled visit. Please advise when Mrs. Callahan would like to collect her belongings, and I will ensure I am present to facilitate. Regards, James Callahan. The response came within the hour. Mr. Callahan, while we understand your desire to be present during Mrs. Callahan's retrieval of personal items, changing the locks constitutes an attempt to restrict her lawful access to jointly owned property. We strongly advise against this action, as it could be considered constructive eviction and may negatively impact our case. Mrs. Callahan plans to collect her belongings this Saturday at 10 a.m. She will bring her brother David to assist. She expects to have full access to the property at that time. Regards, Rebecca Daniels. I forwarded this to Caroline, who called me immediately. They're trying to intimidate you, she said. But they're right about one thing. Changing the locks without providing immediate access could be problematic. Instead, change the locks but have a key ready to give her when she arrives on Saturday. What about having her brother there? I barely know the guy. That's actually good for you. A witness who isn't directly involved. Just make sure you have someone there as well. Not a romantic interest, she added quickly, but a friend or family member who can serve as your witness. I thought about who I could ask. Most of our mutual friends were still processing the situation, unsure where their loyalties should lie. My own family lives several states away. Then I thought of my colleague, Michael, who had been supportive without being intrusive since noticing my distress at work. I called him, explained the situation in broad strokes, and asked if he could be present on Saturday morning. To my relief, he agreed without hesitation. Just to be clear, he said, "You want me there as a neutral witness, right? Not to help move furniture or anything?" Exactly. Just to observe and make sure things stay civil. I can do that. And James? For what it's worth, I never believed the rumors going around. You're too straight and narrow for that kind of thing. His vote of confidence meant more than he probably realized. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. Saturday arrived with a sense of impending confrontation. I had spent Friday evening meticulously documenting the contents of the house, taking photos of rooms, closets, cabinets, creating a record of everything before Sarah arrived. I had also gathered all of her personal items from throughout the house and placed them in my bedroom to simplify the process. Michael arrived at 9:30, bringing coffee and an encouraging smile. Game plan? He asked as we sat in the kitchen. Let her take whatever personal items she wants, I said. Clothes, jewelry, books, her collection of ceramic cats, all hers. But furniture and household items stay unless specifically discussed and agreed upon. And if she tries to take more, we document it. No confrontations, no arguments. Caroline says we can address any disputed items through the lawyers. At precisely 10 a.m., a car pulled up outside. Through the window, I saw Sarah get out of the passenger side while a tall man, her brother David, emerged from the driver's seat. She looked composed, determined, nothing like the emotional wreck from our meeting at Caroline's office. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and went to answer it. Sarah's expression was neutral as I opened the door, but I caught the flicker of surprise when she saw the new doorknob and deadbolt. You changed the locks, she said flatly. I did. For security. I held out a new key. This is yours for today. She took it without comment, then gestured to the man beside her. You remember my brother David? David nodded curtly. He had never particularly liked me, a feeling that had been mutual. Now his eyes were cold with judgment. Clearly, he had heard Sarah's version of events and believed every word. This is my colleague, Michael, I said, introducing my witness. He's here to help keep things organized. Sarah raised an eyebrow but said nothing as she stepped past me into the foyer. Her eyes scanned the familiar space, lingering on the small changes I had made in her absence. A different arrangement of books on the shelf, the absence of her decorative pillows on the couch, a new coffee table to replace the one we had chosen together. I've gathered your personal items in the bedroom, I said. Clothes, jewelry, toiletries, books, everything I could find that's exclusively yours. She turned to me, something like hurt flashing across her face. You went through my things? I organized them, I corrected. To make this easier, David placed a hand on Sarah's arm. Let's just get what we came for and go. They followed me upstairs to the bedroom, where neatly folded piles of clothing, boxes of books, and bags of personal items awaited. Michael remained a few steps behind, observing silently. Sarah moved through the room examining what I had gathered, occasionally opening drawers and closets to check if I had missed anything. David began loading items into large tote bags they had brought. Where's my grandmother's vest? Sarah asked suddenly, turning to face me. The blue one that was in the living room. I haven't touched it. It should still be there. It's not. I already checked when we came in. I frowned, trying to recall the vase's location. It had been a wedding gift from her grandmother, a delicate hand-painted piece that Sarah treasured. Maybe it got moved during cleaning. Let's look for it together. We went downstairs, Michael and David following. The vase wasn't in its usual spot on the mantel, nor was it on any of the shelves or tables in the living room. I haven't moved it, I insisted as Sarah's expression grew increasingly accusatory. Maybe it got packed away with something else accidentally. Or maybe you broke it and don't want to admit it, David suggested, his tone hostile. I think we should stay focused on collecting Sarah's personal items today, Michael interjected smoothly. If the vase doesn't turn up, it can be addressed through your attorneys. Sarah gave Michael a cool look before turning back to me. What about the dining room set? That was a gift from my parents. The settlement outline we discussed included you taking the furniture, I reminded her. But you withdrew from that agreement, according to your lawyer. So now you're keeping everything? Her voice rose slightly. Not everything. Just what we haven't explicitly agreed upon yet. Your personal items are yours to take today. The rest needs to be negotiated through our lawyers. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. She had expected me to either capitulate entirely or to respond with anger, giving her more ammunition for her narrative of me as unreasonable and vindictive. My calm, measured approach was throwing her off balance. Fine, she said finally. Let's finish upstairs. The next hour passed in tense silence as Sarah and David packed her clothing, jewelry, and personal mementos. I noticed her deliberately leaving behind several items I knew she valued. Her favorite reading chair, a painting she had loved. Perhaps thinking I would call after her, insist she take them, give her an opening for further negotiation or confrontation. I didn't. As they prepared to leave, Sarah paused in the foyer, looking around one last time at the house we had chosen together, had planned to fill with children and memories. It won't feel like home without me, she said quietly, more to herself than to me. But I heard her, and something shifted inside me. Not forgiveness, not even understanding, but a recognition that for Sarah, this was also a loss. Whatever her reasons for betraying our marriage, whatever justifications she had constructed in her mind, she was now facing the consequences of her choices. It already doesn't, I replied honestly, but it will again, for me. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a brief moment, I saw a flash of the woman I had fallen in love with. Vulnerable, uncertain, human. Then her expression hardened. I'll have Rebecca contact your lawyer about the rest of my things, she said, her voice formal again. And James? I'm sorry it came to this. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say that would matter. After they left, Michael helped me reorganize the spaces Sarah's absence had made more noticeable. Gaps on shelves, empty spaces in rooms that now felt unbalanced. You okay? He asked as we finished. I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? No, not really. But I was surviving, moving forward, reclaiming pieces of myself and my life one day at a time. I'm getting there, I said. Thanks for being here today. Anytime, he replied, and I believed him. That night, alone in the house that was now undeniably just mine, I found myself standing in the empty spaces Sarah had left behind. Not just the physical absence of her belongings, but the emotional void her betrayal had created. For the first time since discovering her affair with Mark, I allowed myself to fully feel the loss, not just of my wife and my best friend, but of the future I had planned, the family I had imagined, the trust I had given so completely. I cried then, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from some hidden reservoir of grief I hadn't accessed until now. I cried for the man I had been, naive and trusting. I cried for the love I had believed in, solid and unshakable. I cried for the years wasted on people who had seen my devotion as something to exploit rather than treasure. And when the tears finally stopped, when the storm of emotion had passed, I felt different. Not healed, that would take much longer, but clearer, more focused. The path forward was uncertain, filled with legal complications and emotional landmines, but it was my path now. Mine alone. I went to bed that night with a strange sense of peace. Sarah was right about one thing. The house didn't feel like home anymore. But it would. I would make it mine in ways neither she nor Mark could touch. And in that moment, the first seeds of a plan began to take root in my mind. The weeks following Sarah's retrieval of her personal belongings were filled with legal maneuvering. True to her word, she had Rebecca send a formal request for additional items from the house. Artwork, furniture, kitchen appliances, even gardening tools. Caroline advised me to be strategic, agreeing to some requests while firmly declining others. We're building a pattern of reasonableness, she explained. If this goes to court, we want the judge to see that you've been fair and accommodating while maintaining your position on the house itself. I followed her advice, agreeing to let Sarah have several pieces of furniture she had specifically requested, including a writing desk that had belonged to her mother and the reading chair she had deliberately left behind. In exchange, I asked for the immediate return of my grandfather's watch, which she had taken by accident. During her visit, at work I threw myself into projects, staying late, volunteering for additional responsibilities. My colleagues noticed the change, interpreting my increased dedication as a healthy response to personal difficulties. My boss, Patricia, even called me into her office to express her approval. Whatever's been going on in your personal life, and I'm not asking for details, it hasn't affected your performance. In fact, you've been more focused and productive than ever. That shows character, James. I thanked her, not explaining that work was the only place where I felt competent and in control, where the rules made sense and effort was rewarded proportionately. The rest of my life still felt like navigating a minefield blindfolded. The rumors Sarah had spread continued to circulate among our social circle. But as the weeks passed, the truth began to emerge. Mark's conspicuous absence from group gatherings raised questions. A mutual friend, Emma, who had initially believed Sarah's version of events, called me after running into them together at a restaurant 2 towns over, looking very much like a couple. "I'm so sorry, James," she said, her voice thick with remorse. "I should have known better than to believe. I just never thought Sarah would lie about something like that." "It's okay," I assured her, though it wasn't, not really. "People believe what they want to believe." "No, it's not okay. I've known you for years. I should have given you the benefit of the doubt." After Emma, others began to reach out. Friends who had put the pieces together, who had seen Sarah and Mark together and realized what must have happened. Some apologized for believing the worst about me. Others expressed their shock and disappointment in Sarah and Mark. A few admitted they had known about the affair before I did, but hadn't known how to tell me. Those confessions were the hardest to hear. The thought that people had seen what was happening, had pitied me behind my back while I remained oblivious, burned like acid in my chest. But I swallowed the hurt, thanked them for their honesty, and added their names to a mental list of people I would never fully trust again. Through it all, the house remained my anchor. I began to make small changes, repainting the master bedroom in a deep blue instead of the soft gray Sarah had chosen, rearranging furniture to better suit my preferences, creating a proper home office in the spare room we had designated as a future nursery. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of territory, marking it as mine alone. One evening, as I was painting the dining room, replacing the warm taupe Sarah had insisted on with a rich forest green, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway, balancing the phone between my shoulder and ear as I continued working. Hello? James? The voice was instantly recognizable. Mark. I nearly dropped the roller. Now, how did you get this number? New phone? He said. Look, I know you don't want to talk to me, but please, just hear me out. I should have hung up. That would have been the sensible, self-protective thing to do. But something made me listen. Curiosity, perhaps. Or a masochistic desire to understand how my best friend had justified betraying me so completely. 2 minutes, I said, setting down the roller and wiping my hands on a rag. He exhaled heavily. Thank you. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for weeks. Everything sounds inadequate. I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. What Sarah and I did to you, there's no excuse. Is that it? You called to tell me you're sorry? No? I called because... He paused and I could almost see him running his hand through his hair, the way he always did when nervous. Because I think you should know that Sarah and I aren't together anymore. I laughed, a short, harsh sound. And you think that matters to me because... It doesn't. I know it doesn't change anything for you, but I thought you should hear it from me instead of through the grapevine. She left 2 weeks ago. Said she couldn't be with me without thinking about what we did to you, that the guilt was too much. Sounds like a convenient excuse, I said, surprised by how little I felt about this revelation. No satisfaction, no vindication, just nothing. Maybe it was, Mark admitted. Or maybe she realized what we threw away wasn't worth what we got. I don't know, but I do know that I lost the best friend I ever had, and it's killing me. That was your choice, Mark. Your choice every time you slept with my wife. Every time you looked me in the eye afterward and pretended nothing was wrong. Every time you sat in my house, drank my beer, and laughed with me while planning your next rendezvous with Sarah. I know, he said quietly. I know. Your 2 minutes are up, I said, checking my watch. Don't call this number again. I ended the call and returned to my painting, trying to process this new information. Sarah and Mark had broken up. The affair that had cost me my marriage, my best friendship, and my trust in people had imploded under the weight of its own consequences. I should have felt something. Satisfaction, perhaps, or the vindictive pleasure of knowing they had suffered too. But all I felt was a flat, muted confusion. Had they really expected it to work? Had they thought they could build something lasting on the foundation of such a profound betrayal? That night, I dreamed of Sarah for the first time in weeks. In the dream, she was standing in our bedroom. The bedroom as it had been, before I repainted it, before I caught her with Mark. She was packing a suitcase, crying silently, while I watched from the doorway, unable to speak or move. I never meant for this to happen, Dream Sarah said without looking at me. I never meant to love him. I woke with those words echoing in my mind, unsure if they were something the real Sarah had actually said, or just my subconscious trying to make sense of her actions. Either way, they lingered, an uncomfortable reminder that despite everything, I still didn't fully understand why she had chosen to betray me so completely. The next morning, Caroline called with an update on the divorce proceedings. Rebecca reached out yesterday. She said, they want to resume settlement talks. Given the new dynamics in Sarah's personal situation, she's apparently more amenable to your terms regarding the house. So it was true. Mark and Sarah had definitely split up. What's changed in her position? She's willing to accept a buyout of her interest in the house, based on an independent appraisal minus the value of your inheritance contribution to the down payment. In exchange, she wants an expedited process and a more favorable split of your joint investment accounts. I considered this. How much more favorable? She's asking for 60% instead of 50%. Given that Virginia typically defaults to a 50-50 split in the absence of significant factors like infidelity, which can be difficult to quantify in financial terms, this isn't an unreasonable request if it means securing the house outright. I thought about the investment accounts in question. They weren't insignificant, but they weren't life-changing either. And weighing them against the certainty of keeping the house, if I agree to this, how quickly can we finalize everything? Potentially within a month, if both sides cooperate fully with the paperwork and court scheduling, a month. After months of limbo, the idea of having this chapter closed in just 4 more weeks was almost dizzying. Let's do it, I decided. Draft the agreement. Caroline sounded pleased. I think that's wise. I'll call Rebecca immediately and get the ball rolling. After hanging up, I walked through the house, my house, soon to be legally and indisputably mine alone. The walls I had repainted, the rooms I had reconfigured, the spaces I had reclaimed. It was becoming mine in ways beyond mere ownership, a physical manifestation of my rebuilding process. But as I stood in the living room, Looking out at the wraparound porch that had been one of the features that made us fall in love with the house, I realized there was still one piece missing. The house was becoming mine, but it wasn't yet a home. For that, I needed something more than just legal ownership. I needed to exorcise the last ghosts of betrayal that still lingered in certain corners, to replace the painful memories with new ones that belonged solely to me. I needed a proper housewarming, not the kind Sarah and I had hosted when we first moved in, with polite conversation and carefully selected wine, but something else entirely. Something that would mark a definitive end to the old chapter and the beginning of something new. An idea began to form, not revenge exactly, but a reclamation. A way to take back not just the house, but the narrative itself. A way to show everyone, including myself, that I had not just survived Sarah and Mark's betrayal, but had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to move forward on my own terms. I picked up my phone and began making a list of people to invite. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday, exactly 32 days after Caroline had called with Sarah's new settlement terms. The court appearance was brief and anticlimactic. A few questions from the judge, signatures on documents, and it was done. Sarah and I didn't speak beyond polite acknowledgments, though I caught her looking at me several times with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Rebecca pulled Caroline aside as we were leaving the courthouse, and they spoke briefly before Caroline returned to me. Sarah wanted me to pass along a message, she said as we walked to the parking lot. She said to tell you she hopes you'll be happy in the house. I nodded, unsure how to respond. That's civil of her. It is, Caroline agreed. This has been one of the more reasonable divorces I've handled, all things considered. You both made smart choices by not letting emotion drive the legal process. She handed me a large envelope. These are your copies of all the finalized documents. The deed transfer for the house should be recorded within the week. Congratulations, James. It's officially yours. I thanked her, shook her hand, and got into my car. As I sat there, envelope in hand, I expected to feel something momentous. Relief, perhaps, or triumph, or even grief. But what I felt was simpler and more profound. Freedom. The weight of uncertainty that had been my constant companion for months had lifted, leaving behind a quiet clarity. On the drive home, I called Michael, who had become a good friend through this process. It's done, I told him. Finalized this morning. Congratulations, man. How does it feel? Unreal, but good. Listen, remember that housewarming idea I mentioned? I'm doing it next Saturday. You in? Absolutely. What can I bring? We chatted for a few more minutes about the details before hanging up. Next, I called Alex, then several other friends who had stood by me through the divorce. Each conversation ended with the same invitation, a housewarming party to celebrate my new beginning. By the time I reached home, my home, legally and indisputably mine, I had the outline of a plan. This wouldn't be just any party. It would be a statement, a reclamation, a definitive closure of one chapter and the opening of another. The week leading up to the party was filled with preparations. I put the finishing touches on the house renovations I had been working on, completing the painting, rearranging furniture, hanging new artwork. I ordered food from my favorite restaurants rather than the caterers Sarah had always insisted on for our gatherings. I created a playlist of music I loved, but Sarah had tolerated at best. Every decision, no matter how small, was made with a single criterion. Does this reflect me, my tastes, my preferences? Not what Sarah would have chosen, not what would impress our former social circle, just what felt authentically mine. The guest list was carefully curated. Friends who had been supportive, colleagues like Michael who had become unexpected allies, neighbors who had shown kindness during difficult moments. No one who had sided with Sarah in spreading rumors, no one who had known about the affair but kept it from me, no one whose loyalty I questioned. The night before the party, I stood in the center of the living room, looking around at the transformed space. The walls were now a warm terracotta instead of Sarah's preferred eggshell white. The furniture was arranged for conversation rather than to showcase the antique coffee table Sarah had insisted be the room's focal point. The bookshelves displayed my collection of history books and science fiction novels that had previously been relegated to the basement because they didn't match the decor. It looked nothing like the house Sarah and I had shared. It looked like me. Saturday arrived clear and mild. Perfect weather for utilizing the wraparound porch I had recently restored and furnished with comfortable seating. People began arriving at 6, bearing housewarming gifts despite my insistence that none were needed. Bottles of good whiskey, books, practical items for the kitchen. As the house filled with laughter and conversation, I moved from group to group, playing host, making introductions, ensuring everyone felt welcome. The atmosphere was relaxed and genuine, so different from the carefully orchestrated gatherings Sarah had preferred. Alex pulled me aside at one point, a drink in his hand and a thoughtful expression on his face. "This is good what you've done here," he said, gesturing around at the house. "The people. It's like you've reclaimed the place, made it yours." "That was the idea," I admitted. "I needed to exorcise some ghosts." He nodded. "Mission accomplished, I'd say." "You know, I ran into Mark last week at the grocery store." My stomach tightened slightly. "Oh, yeah." He looked terrible. "Asked about you. Wanted to know if you were doing okay." "What did you tell him?" Alex took a sip of his drink. "I told him you were rebuilding, that you were stronger than either of them had given you credit for." I felt a rush of gratitude toward this friend who had stood by me, who understood what I needed without me having to explain. "Thanks, Alex." "Anytime." He clinked his glass against mine. "Now, are you going to tell me what's in that envelope everyone's been asking about?" He nodded toward the mantel, where I had placed a large envelope similar to the one Caroline had given me containing the divorce documents. It had been generating curious glances and speculation throughout the evening. "That," I said with a small smile, "is for later." As the night progressed and dinner had been served and enjoyed, I found myself standing in the center of my living room, surrounded by people who had helped me through the darkest period of my life. The conversation quieted as I raised my glass. "I want to thank all of you for coming tonight," I began. "This past year has been challenging, to put it mildly. I lost my marriage, my best friend, and for a while my sense of self. But I never lost this house. And now, thanks in part to many of you, I've rebuilt not just my living space, but my life." Murmurs of approval and a few supportive comments rippled through the room. "Some of you have asked about the envelope on the mantel," I continued, setting down my glass and retrieving it. "When my divorce was finalized last week, I made a decision. The house is now legally mine, but there was still one thing left to do to truly make it mine in every sense." I opened the envelope and removed a stack of documents. "These are donation forms. I've decided to convert the east wing of the house, what was going to be our family room and nursery, into temporary housing for people transitioning out of abusive relationships." The room went silent for a moment before erupting in surprised exclamations and questions. "It's a partnership with New Beginnings," I explained, referring to a local organization that supported survivors of domestic abuse. "They'll manage the program, screen participants, provide counseling services. I'm just providing the space and funding for renovations to create a separate entrance and living quarters." "But that's the part of the house you were most excited about," Michael said, looking confused. "The family room with the view of the garden, the nursery with the perfect morning light." "It was," I acknowledged. "And that's exactly why it needs to become something else now." Those rooms were filled with dreams that died the moment I walked in on Sarah and Mark. I could leave them empty, monuments to what might have been, or I could transform them into something meaningful, something that might help other people rebuild their lives the way I've had to rebuild mine. I looked around at the faces watching me, surprised, thoughtful, moved. This isn't about revenge or bitterness. It's about creating something positive from a painful experience. It's about making this house truly mine by deciding what it stands for, what happens within its walls. The response was overwhelming. Offers of help with renovations, suggestions for furnishings, questions about how the program would work. As the conversation flowed around me, I felt something shift inside, a loosening of the last knot of pain that had been lodged in my chest since the day I found Sarah and Mark together. Later, as the party was winding down and guests were beginning to leave, Emma approached me. She had been quieter than usual throughout the evening, watching more than participating. "What you're doing with the house," she said, her voice soft. "It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Something angry, maybe. Or something that completely erased the past. But this acknowledges what happened and transforms it into something better. It's brave." "I don't know about brave," I said honestly. "It just feels right. Like the house has a purpose now beyond just being mine." "Well, I think it's inspiring," she said, then hesitated before adding, "Sarah would never have agreed to something like this. She was always so protective of her perfect home, her perfect image. I considered this. Maybe that was part of the problem. We were more concerned with appearances than substance." Emma nodded. "For what it's worth, I think you're going to be okay, James. Better than okay." After the last guest had left and I was alone in the quiet house, my house with its new purpose and new energy, I walked through each room, straightening a few things, collecting glasses, turning off lights. In the East Wing, where the renovation would soon begin, I stood in what would have been the nursery and allowed myself one final moment of mourning for the family that would never exist. Then I closed the door on that future and returned to the present, to my present, to the life I was building deliberately and thoughtfully from the wreckage of betrayal. I slept that night without dreams of Sarah or Mark, without waking to phantom sounds in the empty house. And when morning came, I rose to sunlight streaming through windows I had uncovered by removing the heavy drapes Sarah had insisted upon, illuminating a home that finally, completely, belonged to me alone. Not just legally, but in every way that mattered. 6 months after the housewarming party, the renovation of the East Wing was complete. What had once been planned as our family space was now a self-contained apartment with its own entrance, a small but functional kitchen, a comfortable bedroom, a living area, and a private bathroom. The decor was warm and welcoming, but not personalized, a blank canvas for whoever would temporarily call this space home. New Beginnings had already selected the first resident, a young woman named Alicia who was leaving an emotionally abusive relationship and needed a safe place to rebuild her life. She would move in next week. I had gradually settled into a new routine. Work still occupied much of my time, but I had also found new interests. A hiking group that met on weekends, cooking classes at the community college, volunteer work with a literacy program at the local library. My social circle had shifted and expanded, now including people who knew me only as I was now, not as half of James and Sarah. News about Sarah came to me occasionally through mutual acquaintances. She had moved to Indianapolis for a new job. She wasn't seeing Mark anymore. That had ended as abruptly as he had told me. She had asked about me once or twice, but never directly reached out. Mark was a different story. He emailed periodically, apologies, updates on his life, veiled requests for forgiveness or at least acknowledgement. I read the emails but never responded. There was nothing left to say, no possible configuration of words that could rebuild what he had destroyed. On a crisp autumn Saturday, as I was raking leaves in the front yard, a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. A woman stepped out, mid-30s, professionally dressed, with a portfolio case under her arm. She approached with purpose. "James Callahan?" she asked. "Yes." I leaned the rake against a nearby tree, wary of strangers who knew my name. "My name is Diane Mercer. I'm a journalist with the Chronicle. I'm working on a feature about innovative approaches to supporting survivors of domestic abuse. New Beginnings mentioned your partnership with them. I was hoping to talk to you about it." I hesitated. I had deliberately kept a low profile with the project, insisting that New Beginnings not use my name in their materials about the transitional housing program. "I'm not sure there's much to tell. I provided the space. They do the actual work." Diane smiled undeterred. "From what I understand, it's a bit more than that. Converting part of your personal home into transitional housing is unusual. Most people choose to donate money or volunteer time, not open their private space. It's a separate wing with its own entrance." I clarified. "It's not like I'm sharing my living room. Still, it's a significant commitment. May I ask what inspired you to do this?" I looked at the house. My house with its wraparound porch and gabled roof and fresh paint job. The house that had witnessed the collapse of my marriage and my subsequent rebuilding. The house that had been the one thing I refused to surrender. "Let's just say I understand what it means to need a safe place to start over," I said finally. "Sometimes the hardest part of leaving a bad situation is figuring out where to go next." Diane studied me with interest. "Would you be willing to tell me more about that?" "Off the record, if you prefer." I considered her request. I had never publicly discussed what happened with Sarah and Mark. The people who needed to know the truth already did, and I had no interest in airing my personal tragedy for public consumption. But there was something about Diane's approach, professional but compassionate, interested but not invasive, that made me reconsider. "Why don't you come in?" I suggested. "I can give you a tour of the wing and explain the program. The personal background. We'll see." She followed me into the house, commenting appreciatively on the architecture and decor. I showed her the main living areas briefly before leading her to the East Wing entrance. "This door connects to my part of the house, but it stays locked when someone is in residence." I explained as we entered the transitional housing space. The residents have their own entrance, their own mailbox, complete privacy. Diane nodded, taking notes as I showed her the apartment. The safety features, the comfortable but practical furnishings, the small touches that made it feel like a home rather than an institution. New Beginnings provides counseling, job placement assistance, and other support services. I continued. Residents can stay for up to 6 months while they get back on their feet. The idea is to create a bridge between crisis and independence. And you fund all of this? She asked. I provided the space and paid for the renovations. New Beginnings covers the operational costs and support services. It's a partnership. We completed the tour and returned to my kitchen, where I offered her coffee. As we sat at the island with our mugs, Diane set aside her notebook. Off the record now, she said, what made you decide to do this? It's an incredible gift, but it's also very personal. Most people who experience trauma don't turn their homes into healing spaces for others. I looked down at my coffee, considering how much to share. About 1.5 years ago, my wife had an affair with my best friend. I caught them together in our bed in this house. Diane's expression showed compassion without pity. I'm sorry. That's a profound betrayal. It was. The divorce was complicated. The one thing I refused to give up was this house. Not because of its monetary value, but because it represented everything I had worked for, everything I had planned for my future. Letting it go felt like letting them take everything from me. So you fought for it. I nodded. And I won. But afterward, I realized having the house wasn't enough. The memories were still here, the plans we'd made for a family, the future we'd imagined together, particularly in that East Wing, which was going to be where our children would grow up. So you transformed it. Yes, I needed to change what those rooms meant, what they represented. They couldn't be monuments to what I'd lost. They needed to become something new, something that acknowledged pain but created possibility. Diane was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. That's remarkably healthy, actually. Many people would have just closed off those rooms or sold the house eventually. I shrugged. I thought about both options, but this felt right. The house had become a symbol of my resilience, my refusal to be defined by what had happened to me. Extending that to help others facing their own difficult transitions just made sense. May I ask how you're doing now? Beyond the project, I mean. I considered the question seriously. I'm good, not perfect. There are still moments when something will trigger a memory, or when I'll catch myself planning to tell Sarah something before remembering she's not in my life anymore. But those moments are fewer and farther between. I'm building something new on my own terms. And your ex-wife? Your former friend? They're not part of my life anymore. I've heard they're both doing fine. That's all I need to know. Diane nodded, understanding the boundary I was setting. She finished her coffee and gathered her notes. Thank you for sharing your story with me, even off the record. Would you be comfortable with me including some of the factual information about the program in my article? Without the personal background, that would be fine. Just focus on New Beginnings and the work they're doing. They're the ones who deserve the recognition. After Diane left, I stood on the porch watching her car disappear down the street. Talking about Sarah and Mark had been easier than I expected. The pain more distant, more processed. Not gone, I doubted it would ever completely vanish, but transformed into something I could carry without being crushed by it. That evening, as I prepared dinner in the kitchen I had redesigned to my own specifications, my phone rang. It was Caroline, my divorce lawyer, whom I hadn't spoken to in several months. James, she said when I answered. Sorry to call out of the blue. Huh. How are you doing? I'm well, Caroline. What's up? I ran into Sarah today at a conference in Richmond. She asked about you. I paused in chopping vegetables. What did she want to know? Just how you were doing. If you were still in the house. If you were seeing anyone. And what did you tell her? That you were doing well from what I'd heard. That yes, you were still in the house. And that your personal life wasn't something I could discuss. Even if I knew the details. I resumed chopping. Thank you. She also mentioned that she's moving back to the area. Taking a position at her old firm again? This news landed differently than I expected. Not with anxiety or anger, but with a mild curiosity, like hearing about a former classmate you once knew well, but now barely think about. I see, I said. Well, it's a big enough area. I doubt our paths will cross much. That's what I thought you'd say, Caroline replied, sounding relieved. I just wanted you to hear it from me rather than being surprised if you ran into her somewhere. After we hung up, I finished preparing my dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and sat at the dining room table. No longer the one Sarah had chosen, but a handcrafted piece I had commissioned from a local woodworker. As I ate, I thought about Sarah returning to the area, about the possibility of encountering her at a restaurant, or store or community event. The thought didn't disturb me as it once would have. The house had protected me, had given me space to heal, to reconstruct my sense of self apart from the marriage and the betrayal. I had reclaimed not just the physical space, but my own narrative, my own future. If I did see Sarah again, or Mark for that matter, they would be meeting a different James than the one they had known and betrayed. A James who had discovered his own resilience, who had transformed pain into purpose, who had learned that the best revenge wasn't about hurting others, but about refusing to let their actions define the rest of his life. As I carried my dishes to the sink, I glanced out the window at the separate entrance to the East Wing, where Alicia would soon begin her own journey of rebuilding. In less than a week, this house that had once witnessed such profound betrayal would become a place of healing and new beginnings for someone else. There was a satisfying symmetry to that, a completion of the transformation that had begun the day I changed the locks and decided the house would remain mine. Not just the structure, with its gabled roof and wraparound porch, but everything it represented: security, possibility, the right to determine one's own future. The dream house that had become reality, not despite the nightmare that had unfolded within its walls, but because of how that nightmare had been transfigured into something unexpected and meaningful. My house, my terms, my future, finally and completely mine. 3 months after Alicia moved into the East Wing, I found myself at the grocery store on a rainy Tuesday evening, mindlessly adding items to my cart while mentally reviewing an upcoming presentation for work. I turned down the cereal aisle and nearly collided with another shopper. "I'm sorry, I wasn't..." The words died in my throat as I found myself face to face with Mark. Time seemed to stop as we stood there, frozen between the Cheerios and the granola. He looked different, thinner, with shadows under his eyes and new lines etched around his mouth. His hair was shorter, less carefully styled than he used to keep it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "James," he finally said, his voice catching slightly. "I dot." "Hi, Mark." My response was flat, devoid of emotion. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at his nearly empty basket. "I didn't know you shopped here." "I always have." The unspoken reminder hung between us. He knew my routines, my habits, my preferences. He had simply never expected to encounter me here, in this ordinary place, on this ordinary evening. "How are you?" he asked, then immediately grimaced. "Sorry, that's a stupid question." "I'm fine," I said, and realized with some surprise that it was true. Standing before the man who had betrayed 15 years of friendship, who had slept with my wife in my bed, I felt none of the rage or pain I would have expected. Just a strange, detached curiosity, as if observing a specimen from my past. I'm..." He hesitated, seeming to debate between honesty and social convention. "I've been better." I nodded, unsure what response was appropriate. What was the protocol for grocery store encounters with the ex-best friend who had destroyed your marriage? Emily Post had never covered this particular social scenario. "I heard about what you're doing with part of the house," he said after an uncomfortable silence. "The transitional housing program. That's really amazing, James." "Thanks." I shifted my weight, glancing down the aisle past him, planning my escape route. "Look, I know you don't want to talk to me," Mark continued, words tumbling out quickly as if afraid I'd walk away before he finished. "I don't blame you. What we did, it was unforgivable. I know that." "Then why are we having this conversation?" I asked quietly. He flinched. "I guess I miss my friend. I miss who we were. I miss who I was when I was worthy of your friendship." Something tightened in my chest. Not pain exactly, but recognition. There had been moments, especially in the early days after discovering their betrayal, when I had missed him too. Not the man standing before me now, but the friend I had believed him to be. "I can't give you absolution, Mark," I said finally. "If that's what you're looking for, I don't have it to give." "I know." He looked down at his shoes. "I don't deserve it anyway." An announcement came over the store's speaker system, breaking the moment. I used the interruption to step around him. "Take care of yourself, Mark," I said, not unkindly but with finality. He nodded, blinking rapidly. "You too, James." I continued down the aisle, not looking back. I finished my shopping methodically, paid for my groceries, and drove home through the rain. Only when I was unpacking my bags in the kitchen did I realize I was shaking slightly. It wasn't anger or grief causing the tremor in my hands, but a strange sense of release. Seeing Mark, speaking to him, had confirmed something important. He was no longer a looming figure in my mental landscape. He was just a man, flawed and regretful, no longer holding any power over my emotional well-being. I poured myself a glass of scotch and went to sit on the covered portion of the porch, watching the rain come down in sheets, turning my garden into a glistening watercolor blur. From the separate entrance of the East Wing, I saw lights on in Alicia's windows. She was doing well in the program, working at a local bookstore, attending therapy twice a week, slowly rebuilding her confidence after years in a relationship that had systematically destroyed it. Watching her progress had been unexpectedly rewarding, a reminder that transformation was possible even after profound betrayal. Not despite the pain, but through it, because of it. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Still on for hiking this weekend? Weather's supposed to clear by Saturday." I smiled and texted back a confirmation. My life had developed new contours over the past months. Work, friends, volunteer activities, my ongoing house projects. A functional, meaningful existence constructed from the ruins of what had come before. As I sat there nursing my scotch and listening to the rain, I thought about how differently I had reacted to seeing Mark compared to how I might have even 6 months earlier. There was healing in that, a measurable marker of progress. I slept soundly that night, undisturbed by dreams of what had been lost. A week after my grocery store encounter with Mark, Caroline called to invite me to a charity fundraiser her law firm was hosting. "It's for the Children's Legal Advocacy Center," she explained. "Black tie, silent auction, the usual rubber chicken dinner. But it's a good cause, and I thought you might enjoy an evening out. I appreciate the invitation, but charity galas aren't really my scene." I hedged, recalling the countless similar events I'd attended with Sarah, both of us playing our parts in the careful social choreography. "James," Caroline's voice took on the same firm tone she'd used during our legal consultations. "When was the last time you went on an actual date?" I blinked, surprised by the direct question. "I'm not sure how that's relevant. It's been over a year since your divorce was finalized. Almost 2 years since the discovery." "I'm aware of the timeline," I said dryly. "I'm not suggesting you need to be in a relationship," she continued. "But part of moving forward is actually, moving forward. Putting yourself in new situations, meeting new people." I sighed, knowing she had a point. While I had rebuilt many aspects of my life, romantic involvement remained untouched territory. The thought of making myself vulnerable again, of trusting someone with my heart, still felt like an unnecessary risk. "Fine," I relented. "Send me the details." "Excellent." Caroline sounded pleased with herself. "And James? My associate Diana will be there. The one who handled the Johnson case with me last year. Smart, divorced, loves hiking." "Just saying. Are you matchmaking counselor?" I asked, amused despite myself. "Merely providing potentially relevant information. See you Saturday." The night of the gala, I found myself standing before the mirror adjusting my bow tie, experiencing a strange sense of déjà vu. How many times had I done this before? Dressed in formal wear for some event that Sarah had deemed important for our social standing? The difference now was that I was going for myself, for a cause I believed in, not to maintain appearances or please someone else. The venue was an elegantly restored historic hotel downtown, its ballroom transformed with twinkling lights and floral arrangements. I spotted Caroline near the entrance, striking in a deep blue gown, speaking with a group of colleagues. "James," she exclaimed when she saw me, breaking away to greet me with a brief hug. "I'm so glad you came. Let me introduce you around." For the next hour, I circulated through the crowd, making polite conversation with Caroline's colleagues, bidding on a few items in the silent auction, nursing a glass of surprisingly decent wine. It wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't particularly stimulating either, until Caroline appeared at my elbow with a tall woman with short, dark hair and intelligent eyes. "James, this is Diana Matthews, my associate I mentioned." "Diana, James Callahan." Diana extended her hand with a smile that reached her eyes. "The famous James. Caroline speaks highly of you." "All exaggerated, I'm sure," I replied, shaking her hand, though I am grateful for her legal expertise. "Caroline, there's Judge Winters," Diana said, nodding toward an elderly man across the room. "Didn't you want to speak with him about the Miller appeal?" Caroline took the hint with a knowing smile. "So I did." "Excuse me, you two." As Caroline made her way across the room, Diana turned to me with a conspiratorial expression. "Just so we're clear, I told Caroline not to play matchmaker." I laughed, unexpectedly relieved by her directness. "And yet here we are." "Here we are," she agreed. "Though in the interest of full disclosure, when she mentioned you might be coming tonight, I didn't object too strenuously." "Is that so? You have an interesting story." Diana said, her expression becoming more serious. Handling your divorce the way you did, then creating the transitional housing program instead of selling the house, it suggests a person with depth and resilience, or someone too stubborn to let go. I suggested. Sometimes stubborn is just another word for determined. She glanced around the ballroom. Want to escape to the terrace for a few minutes? It's getting rather warm in here. The terrace overlooked a carefully maintained garden, softly lit by discreet landscape lighting. The night air was cool and refreshing after the stuffy ballroom. We found a quiet corner away from the few other guests taking similar refuge outside. So, Diana said, leaning against the stone balustrade, Caroline told me the legal version of your story. Would you mind telling me your version? You mean the one with all the messy emotional details the court documents don't capture? I asked, only half joking. Only if you want to. I surprised myself by wanting to tell her. Not the sanitized version I gave colleagues or the strictly factual account I provided to new acquaintances, but the real story with all its pain and complexity. Perhaps it was the anonymity of the darkness, or the fact that as Caroline's colleague, she already knew the outline. Or perhaps it was simply time to speak the full truth to someone new. So I told her about finding Sarah and Mark together, about the shock and disbelief, about the cold determination that had carried me through the divorce, about fighting for the house when I could have simply walked away. The house became symbolic. I explained. It wasn't just about property or investment. It was the one thing I refused to let them take from me. Diana listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before asking, "And are you happy there?" "In the house, I mean." It was a question no one had asked me before. Not in that straightforward way. People had asked if I was okay, if I was managing, if keeping the house had been worth the legal battle, but not if I was happy. "Yes," I said, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. "Not immediately, not without effort, but I've made it mine. Created something new in the space where something else was destroyed. There's satisfaction in that. More than satisfaction, I'd say," Diana observed. "There's wisdom in it. Many people would have walked away, started fresh somewhere, without the painful memories. Creating something positive in that same space takes courage. Or therapy," I said with a self-deprecating smile. "Quite a lot of therapy." She laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "That too, I'm sure." We talked easily after that, moving from the serious to the mundane. Her work with Caroline's firm, my recent promotion, a hiking trail she recommended, a book I'd just finished. By the time we returned to the ballroom for dinner, something had shifted. A connection established that felt both surprising and natural. As the evening came to a close, Diana handed me her card. "I enjoyed talking with you, James. Perhaps we could continue the conversation sometime? Maybe over coffee?" I took the card, noting the personal number she'd written on the back. "I'd like that." Walking to my car afterward, I felt an unfamiliar lightness, a cautious optimism I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Not because of Diana specifically, though. I had genuinely enjoyed her company. But because for the first time since Sarah's betrayal, the idea of connecting with someone new didn't feel like an unbearable risk. Diana and I met for coffee the following weekend, a casual Saturday morning meeting at a small cafe downtown. Our conversation flowed as easily as it had at the gala, ranging from professional challenges to favorite films to childhood memories. There was an ease between us, a comfortable rhythm that didn't demand anything beyond the present moment. "Would you like to see a movie next weekend?" I asked as we were preparing to leave. "The film festival is starting at the Indie Theater." "I'd like that," she said with a smile. "But I should be upfront about something." My guard instantly rose, conditioned by past betrayal to expect complications. "Oh, I'm not looking for anything serious right now," Diana said directly. "I like you and I enjoy your company, but I'm still finding my footing after my own divorce. I'd like to get to know you better as a friend first and see where things go naturally without pressure." The tension in my shoulders eased. "That's exactly what I need too," I admitted. "Friendship first. No expectations beyond that." "Good," she said, looking relieved. "That's settled then. Now, about that film festival. Over the following weeks, Diana and I developed a comfortable routine. Movies or coffee every weekend, occasional text exchanges during the week, a gradual building of trust and understanding. There was attraction between us, certainly, but neither of us felt any rush to define or escalate the relationship. It was refreshing after the intensity and ultimate devastation of my marriage to Sarah. Meanwhile, Alicia's time in the East Wing transitional housing was approaching its end. She had saved enough for a security deposit on her own apartment, had received a promotion at the bookstore, and was, according to her case manager at New Beginnings, thriving beyond expectations. We've selected the next resident. Laura from New Beginnings told me during our monthly check-in. A woman named Vanessa and her 6-year-old daughter, Emily. They've been in the emergency shelter for almost 2 months after leaving an abusive situation. A child? I hadn't considered that the housing might accommodate children. Is the space suitable? The bedroom is large enough for bunk beds or a small second bed, Laura assured me. And having the private entrance and small yard area is actually ideal for them. Unless you have concerns? I shook my head, thinking of the room that had once been intended as a nursery for my own children, now being repurposed to shelter a child escaping violence. No concerns. Just let me know if there are any modifications needed to make the space more child-friendly. The day Alicia moved out was unexpectedly emotional. She had asked if I would help transport some of her belongings to her new apartment, and I readily agreed. As we carried the last box to my SUV, she paused on the walkway, looking back at the East Wing entrance. I was so scared when I first came here, she said quietly. Not of you, she added quickly, seeing my expression. Of starting over, of failing, of ending up going back to him because I couldn't make it on my own. But you did make it, I reminded her. You're doing exceptionally well. She smiled, a confident expression that had been absent when she first arrived. I am, aren't I? She turned to me, suddenly serious. Thank you, James. Not just for the housing, but for showing me it's possible to rebuild after someone takes apart who you thought you were. I felt a lump form in my throat. You did the rebuilding yourself. Maybe, she conceded, but having a safe place to do it made all the difference. After helping Alicia settle into her new apartment, I returned home to prepare the East Wing for Vanessa and Emily's arrival the following week. I found myself adding touches I hadn't considered for Alicia. A small bookshelf filled with children's books I ordered online, colorful curtains for the bedroom, a basket of art supplies. Small gestures to make a child feel welcome in a strange new place. Diana came over to help, bringing additional children's books from her own collection and a stuffed elephant that she insisted every child's room needed. My aunt gave me one like this when my parents divorced. She explained as she positioned it on what would be Emily's bed. Mr. Peanuts got me through some tough nights. As we worked together, I found myself watching Diana. The careful way she arranged the books by reading level, her smile as she imagined a child's delight at the art supplies, the occasional brush of her hand against mine as we moved around the small space. Something warm and unfamiliar stirred in my chest. What? She asked, catching me watching her. Nothing, I said. Just see. Thank you for helping with this. She smiled, seeing more than I'd said. It's my pleasure. I always wanted to be part of something like this. Something that makes a real difference for someone during their worst moments. Later, after we'd finished preparing the East Wing and were having dinner on my porch, Diana asked, "Do you ever think about having children of your own?" The question caught me off guard. It had been a central part of my life plan with Sarah. A family, children running through this very house. After the divorce, I had filed that dream away, too painful to examine. I used to, I admitted. With Sarah, it was always part of the future plan. After everything fell apart, I guess I stopped thinking about it. Diana nodded thoughtfully. I understand. After my marriage ended, I had to reconsidering everything I thought was certain about my future. And now? I asked. Do you think about having children? Sometimes, she said, if the right circumstances came along. But I've also made peace with the possibility that it might not happen, and I'm building a meaningful life either way. I reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture of recognition and shared understanding. She squeezed my hand in return, and we sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around us. 3 days before Vanessa and Emily were scheduled to move in, I received an unexpected email from Sarah. The sight of her name in my inbox sent a jolt through me, not of pain, but of surprise. We hadn't communicated directly since the divorce was finalized. Subject: request for a meeting from Sarah Callahan to James Callahan. James, I hope this email finds you well. I've been back in the area for several months now, and I've heard through mutual acquaintances about the wonderful work you're doing with New Beginnings. I know you have no reason to do me any favors, but I'm writing to ask if you would consider meeting with me. There are things I need to say to you that should be said in person, not via email. If you're willing, please let me know a time and place that would be convenient for you. Sarah. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the brief message. My first instinct was to ignore it, to maintain the clean break we had established. But something about the timing, just as I was feeling myself truly moving forward, made me hesitate. I called Diana, who listened carefully as I read her the email. What do you think? I asked after a moment of silence. I think it depends on what you need, she said thoughtfully. Not what she needs, but what you need. Would speaking with her provide closure for you? Or would it just reopen old wounds? I considered this. I don't know. I thought I had closure already. Maybe you do, Diana said. But sometimes people think closure comes from never having to face the person who hurt them again. In my experience, true closure often comes from being able to face them and realize they no longer have power over your emotions. Like seeing Mark in the grocery store, I mused. Exactly. The question is whether you're ready for that with Sarah and whether it would benefit your healing process. After we hung up, I sat on the porch swing, weighing my options. The Sarah who had written that email was a stranger to me now. A different name. She'd gone back to her maiden name, I noted. A different email address, perhaps a different person than the woman who had betrayed me so completely. I had changed too. The man who had discovered his wife's infidelity, who had fought for the house with cold determination, who had systematically rebuilt his life, that man was both me and not me, a past version whose pain I remembered but no longer actively felt. Perhaps that was reason enough to meet with her. Not for her benefit, but for my own confirmation that the past was truly past. I replied simply, Sarah, I'm willing to meet. This Thursday, 1 p.m. at Riverside Cafe. James Thursday arrived clear and mild. I dressed carefully for the meeting, not formally, but in clothes that made me feel confident and at ease. I arrived at the cafe early, selecting a table on the outdoor patio overlooking the river. A public place where our conversation wouldn't feel too intimate, but also wouldn't be easily overheard. I saw her before she saw me, walking along the riverfront path, her hair shorter than she'd worn it during our marriage, her posture straight and purposeful. She looked like Sarah, the woman I had once known better than anyone in the world, now a stranger with a familiar face. She spotted me and hesitated briefly before approaching the table. I stood as she reached me, an automatic courtesy that felt both natural and strange. James, she said, her voice carrying the slight tremor I remembered from moments when she was nervous, but trying not to show it. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Sarah, I acknowledged, gesturing for her to take the seat across from me. You look well. So do you, she said, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Really well, actually. Better than I expected. I raised an eyebrow. Did you expect me to be falling apart? She flushed slightly. No, of course not. It's just, you seem different. Centered. At peace. I am, I said simply. Most days anyway. A server came to take our orders. Coffee for both of us. A habit from our married days that neither of us had apparently abandoned. When we were alone again, Sarah took a deep breath. I've rehearsed what I wanted to say to you 100 times, and now I can't remember any of it, she admitted with a small, self-deprecating laugh. Just say whatever you need to say, I suggested, surprised by my own calm. She nodded, folding her hands on the table in front of her. First, I want to apologize. Not the way I did right after you found out, when I was still making excuses and trying to manage the fallout. A real apology, now that I've had time to understand what I did, not just to our marriage, but to you as a person. I listened without interrupting as she continued. What I did was unforgivable. Not just the affair, but the lies, the betrayal of your trust, the fact that it was with Mark. She looked down at her hands. I've been in therapy for over a year trying to understand why I did it, why I was willing to destroy something good for something that was ultimately empty. The server returned with our coffees, creating a brief pause in her confession. When we were alone again, Sarah looked directly at me. I don't expect your forgiveness, James. I'm not here to ask for that. I just needed you to know that I understand now, in a way I didn't then, exactly how much damage I caused. And I'm profoundly sorry for it. I took a sip of my coffee, considering her words. The Sarah I had been married to had rarely admitted fault without qualification, had always found ways to distribute blame or minimize her responsibility. This directness, this ownership of her actions was new. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. I appreciate the apology. There's something else, she said, looking nervous again. I heard about what you're doing with the east wing of the house, the transitional housing program. I nodded, wondering where this was going. It's remarkable, James. Truly, taking something painful and transforming it into something healing. It's exactly what I would have expected from you if I had been paying attention to who you really were during our marriage. There was a note of regret in her voice that sounded genuine, but also a hint of something else. Admiration, perhaps, or wistfulness. New Beginnings does the real work, I said, deflecting slightly. I just provide the space. That's not how they tell it, Sarah replied. Laura Matthews is an old friend from college. She's the one who told me you were involved. She says you're hands-on with the program, that you personalize the space for each resident, that you've become something of a mentor to some of them. I was surprised to learn of Sarah's connection to New Beginnings, though it explained how she knew so much about my involvement. It's evolved over time, I acknowledged. The program, my role in it. I'm on their fundraising committee now, Sarah explained. That's partly why I wanted to meet with you. Not just for the overdue apology, but also because we're organizing a major donor event next month, and they want to highlight the Transitional Housing Program as their newest initiative. I felt a flicker of unease. I've intentionally kept a low profile with the program. I know, Laura mentioned that. They would respect your privacy, of course, but it would mean a lot to have your permission to showcase the program itself, even without directly involving you. I considered this. My instinct was to refuse, to keep my involvement private, separate from Sarah and her world. But that seemed short-sighted. The program deserves support and recognition, regardless of my personal feelings. The program should be highlighted, I agreed cautiously. It's doing important work, but I'd prefer to remain anonymous in any materials or presentations. Sarah looked relieved. That's completely understandable. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, There's one more thing, if you're willing to hear it. Go ahead. I know it's none of my business, but I wanted you to know that I'm glad you kept the house. When we were dividing everything, I was so angry that you were insisting on it. Felt like you were punishing me. But seeing what you've done with it, it's where it belongs. With someone who sees its potential beyond just being a nice place to live. It was perhaps the most genuine thing she had said, and I felt an unexpected softening toward this woman who had once been the center of my world. The house was always more important to me than to you, I observed. You liked what it represented. Success, stability, status. I loved the house itself. She nodded, acknowledging the truth of this. I didn't appreciate a lot of things properly back then. We fell into silence, sipping our coffees and watching the river flow past. It was a comfortable silence, not charged with unspoken accusations or lingering resentments, but the quiet of two people who had once known each other intimately and now were finding a new, more distant equilibrium. Are you seeing anyone? She asked eventually, her tone carefully casual. I hesitated, thinking of Diana, our careful, deliberate building of friendship, the unspoken potential for something more. I'm getting to know someone, I said. It's early. We're taking our time. Something flickered across Sarah's face. Not jealousy exactly, but perhaps regret. Good. That's good, James. You deserve someone who values what you offer. What about you? I found myself asking, more out of politeness than genuine interest. No one's serious, she said. I dated a few people after Mark and I ended things, but I realized I needed to sort myself out first. Understand why I made the choices I did, so I don't repeat them. I nodded, respecting her self-awareness if nothing else. As our meeting drew to a close, we walked together toward the parking lot. Before we parted, Sarah turned to me, her expression serious. I know it doesn't change anything, and I don't expect it to, but I truly am sorry, James. For all of it. I know, I said, and was surprised to realize I believed her. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, Sarah. You too, she said softly, though it seems like you already have. We didn't hug or shake hands, just nodded our goodbyes and went our separate ways. She to her car, me to continue walking along the river, processing the interaction. Later that evening, sitting on my porch with a glass of whiskey, I called Diana and told her about the meeting with Sarah. How do you feel about it? She asked after I'd recounted the conversation. I considered the question carefully. Lighter, I said finally, like closing a door that had been left slightly ajar without my realizing it. That sounds like a positive outcome, Diana observed. It was, I agreed, though there was something strange about seeing her again. This person who knows so many intimate details about me, who shared so much of my life, and yet now feels like someone I met in a previous lifetime. That's often how it is with exes, Diana said, especially after a painful ending. They exist in this strange, liminal space, not quite strangers, but no longer the person you once knew so well. Exactly, I said, grateful for her understanding. Listen, "Would you like to come over tomorrow evening? Vanessa and Emily are moving in, and I thought I'd grill on the patio, give them a proper welcome." "I'd like that very much," Diana replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Vanessa and Emily arrived the next day with fewer belongings than Alicia had possessed. Just a few suitcases and boxes. The sparse inventory of a life fled in haste. Emily was a solemn-eyed child, with dark braids and a tentative smile that appeared when she discovered the bookshelf filled with children's books and the art supplies waiting for her. "Mr. James said we could plant flowers in this part of the garden." Laura from New Beginnings was explaining to Vanessa as they toured the small private yard area connected to the east wing. "He's offered to help Emily set up a little vegetable patch too, if she's interested." Emily, who had been listening quietly while clutching the stuffed elephant Diana had left on her bed, looked up at me with the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. "Can we grow strawberries? My grandma used to grow strawberries." I knelt to her level, speaking directly to her, rather than over her head to the adults. "Strawberries are an excellent choice. They're pretty easy to grow, and there's nothing better than picking them right off the plant when they're ripe." "When can we plant them?" she asked, her voice gaining confidence. "Well, we'd need to get some strawberry plants first. Maybe tomorrow after you've had a chance to settle in. We could go to the garden center together if that's okay with your mom." Vanessa, watching our interaction with cautious hope, nodded her permission. "That would be very kind if you're sure it's not an imposition." "Not at all," I assured her. "I've been meaning to expand the garden anyway." Emily would be helping me out. After they were settled in, I returned to my side of the house to prepare for the evening's small welcome dinner. Diana arrived early, bringing a homemade chocolate cake and a small gift bag for Emily. "Just some hair clips and a jump rope," she explained. Little things to make her feel special. As we prepared dinner together, moving around my kitchen with an easy synchronicity that felt both new and familiar, Diana asked, "Is it strange having a child living here, given what this house was supposed to be for you and Sarah originally?" I paused in chopping vegetables, considering her question. "Not strange exactly. Different than I imagined, certainly. But there's something right about it, about having a child's laughter in these rooms, even if it's not how I originally pictured it." Diana came to stand beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "You're doing something remarkable here, James. I'm not sure you fully realize it." I shook my head slightly. "It's just a spare wing of a house that was too big for one person anyway. It's more than that, and you know it," she insisted. "You've created something healing and meaningful from something that caused you immense pain. That's not nothing." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the back door. Emily stood there, the stuffed elephant tucked under one arm, looking both nervous and determined. "Mom said to ask if you need help with anything," she said, her eyes darting between Diana and me. "Perfect timing," Diana said warmly. "I was just about to frost this cake, and I could use an expert assistant. Do you like to bake?" Emily nodded, stepping hesitantly into the kitchen. "My grandma used to let me help with cookies." "Well, frosting a cake is even more fun than cookies, in my opinion," Diana said, pulling out a stool for Emily at the island. "More opportunities for creativity." I watched as Diana gently guided Emily through the process of frosting the cake, her patience and natural ease with the child revealing a side of her I hadn't fully seen before. Emily gradually relaxed, her initial wariness giving way to genuine enjoyment as Diana showed her how to create simple decorative patterns with the back of a spoon. Vanessa joined us shortly after, initially apologetic for Emily's intrusion until she saw how comfortably her daughter was interacting with Diana. The five of us, Laura had stayed for dinner as well, ate on the back patio, the conversation flowing more easily than I would have expected given the circumstances. After dinner, as Emily proudly served the cake she had helped decorate, Laura raised her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said, "and to the people who make them possible." Later, after our guests had returned to their respective sides of the house and Laura had left, Diana and I sat on the porch swing in comfortable silence, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. "Thank you for including me tonight," she said softly. "It meant a lot to be part of this." "I'm glad you were here," I replied honestly. "It wouldn't have been the same without you." She lifted her head to look at me, her expression thoughtful. "You know, when Caroline first told me about you, about what happened with your ex-wife and your former best friend, I couldn't imagine how someone moves forward from that kind of betrayal. But being here, seeing what you've created from the ruins of that pain, it's extraordinary, James." I felt a sudden tightness in my chest, a welling of emotion I hadn't expected. "It wasn't always like this," I admitted. "There were some very dark days, times when I wasn't sure what I was fighting for anymore, if keeping the house was worth the battle." What changed? I did, I said simply. I stopped seeing the house as a reminder of what I'd lost and started seeing it as a canvas for what I could create. Once that shift happened, everything else gradually fell into place. Diana took my hand, threading her fingers through mine. I'm starting to care about you a great deal, James Callahan, she said, her voice soft but certain. More than I expected to, and probably sooner than is entirely sensible. I tightened my grip on her hand. I'm starting to care about you too, I admitted. And you're right, it probably isn't sensible. But after everything that's happened, I've learned that the heart follows its own timeline, regardless of what our rational minds might prefer. She smiled at that, leaning in to place a gentle kiss on my lips, our first before settling back against my shoulder. We sat there as night fully descended, the porch swing moving gently, both lost in our own thoughts yet completely present with each other. The following Saturday, I took Emily to the garden center as promised. Vanessa came too, initially insisting she would pay for the plants and supplies, until I gently explained that the garden improvements were part of the property development and already budgeted for. You're doing enough just by letting us stay here, I told her as Emily excitedly examined different varieties of strawberry plants with the help of a patient garden center employee. Consider this an investment in the property. You're very kind, Vanessa said quietly. Emily hasn't been this excited about anything in months. Ever since we left, well, she's had to grow up too quickly. Kids are resilient, I offered. Given safety and stability, they can recover from almost anything. She gave me a searching look. You sound like you speak from experience. Different circumstances. I said, but yes, I understand something about rebuilding after having the foundation of your life undermined. Emily returned then, proudly carrying a tray of strawberry plants, effectively ending our conversation. We added garden soil, child-sized tools, and a few cheerful garden markers to our purchases before heading home. The rest of the day was spent creating Emily's garden patch, digging, amending the soil, carefully placing each strawberry plant according to her specific vision. Vanessa joined us eventually, tentatively at first, then with increasing enthusiasm as she saw Emily's excitement. By late afternoon, we had created a small but charming garden space, complete with a handmade sign declaring it Emily's Berry Patch. They won't produce much this season, I explained as we cleaned up our tools, but by next summer, you'll have plenty of strawberries. Emily looked at me with sudden seriousness. But we might not be here next summer. Laura said we can only stay for 6 months. I glanced at Vanessa, unsure how to respond without overstepping. She knelt beside her daughter, brushing dirt from her cheek with gentle fingers. That's true, Pumpkin. But Mr. James has promised that whoever lives here next will take good care of your garden. And maybe we can come back to visit the strawberries sometimes. Emily considered this, then nodded solemnly. Okay, but they have to promise to pick the strawberries so they don't go to waste. It's important not to waste food. Grandma always said so. I promise, I said, equally solemn. No strawberry will go unpicked. That evening, after Vanessa and Emily had returned to their side of the house, I found myself thinking about Emily's comment about not being there next summer. The transitional housing program was designed as a temporary stepping stone. 6 months of stable housing, while residents saved money, attended therapy, and prepared for independent living. It was a good model, proven effective with Alicia and many others in similar programs. But watching Emily place each strawberry plant with such care, planning for a harvest she might not be there to enjoy, had stirred something in me. The East Wing had already evolved from its original concept, from merely providing basic shelter to becoming a more holistic support system. Perhaps it could evolve further. I called Laura the next day to discuss an idea that had been forming since our gardening session. What would you think about extending the residency period for families with children? I asked after explaining my thoughts. Not indefinitely, but perhaps up to a year instead of 6 months, to provide more stability for the kids, especially if they're enrolled in local schools. Laura was thoughtfully silent for a moment. It's an interesting idea. The research does support longer interventions for families with children. Less disruption, better outcomes. But it would mean fewer families served overall, since the turnover would be slower. What if we expanded? I suggested. There's a detached garage on the property that's barely used. With some renovation, it could be converted into a second small living space. That would be... Laura paused, clearly processing this new possibility. James, that would be incredible. It would essentially double our capacity. But the cost of such a renovation? I'd cover it, I said immediately. Consider it phase 2 of the project. After discussing logistics and timeline, we agreed that Laura would bring the proposal to the New Beginnings Board for formal approval, though she was confident they would embrace the expansion enthusiastically. That night, I called Diana to share the new development. She listened attentively, then asked, "What prompted this?" "It's a wonderful idea, but it seems to have come somewhat suddenly." I told her about Emily's strawberry plants and her comment about not being there for the harvest. It just got me thinking about the impact of transience on children. 6 months is a long time in an adult's perspective, but in a child's life, it's significant. Just as they're settling in, forming attachments, feeling secure, they have to move again. "You're thinking about stability," Diana observed. "About what children need to thrive." "Yes," I admitted. "I suppose I am. You know," she said carefully, "for someone who told me they'd stop thinking about having children of their own, you seem to have very parental instincts." I was silent for a moment, considering her observation. "Maybe I never really stopped thinking about it," I said finally. "Maybe I just buried it under all the other losses when Sarah betrayed me." "And now?" Diana's voice was soft, a gentle inquiry rather than a demand. "Now," I took a deep breath. "Now I'm remembering that the future I imagined with Sarah wasn't the only possible future. That there are other paths that could include family, just differently than I originally planned." "That sounds like healing to me," Diana said. "Being able to reclaim not just your present, but your vision of the future." After we hung up, I walked through the house, my house, thinking about how much had changed in the 2 years since I discovered Sarah and Mark's betrayal. The house itself had transformed, with new colors, new furnishings, new energy. The East Wing had evolved from a painful reminder of lost dreams to a place of healing and new beginnings for others. And now, with the planned garage conversion, the property was expanding its purpose even further. But the most profound transformation had been within me. The man who had stood in the bedroom doorway, frozen in shock at the sight of his wife in his best friend's arms, would hardly recognize the person I had become. Not because I had changed fundamentally, but because I had reclaimed parts of myself that had been overshadowed during my marriage. My independence, my capacity for resilience, my ability to envision and create new possibilities from the ruins of old expectations. As I stood on the porch looking out at the garden where Emily's strawberry plants were now settled in their new home, I felt a deep sense of peace, not because everything was perfect or because the pain of betrayal had been erased, but because I had learned that wholeness doesn't require the absence of pain. It requires the integration of pain into a larger story, one that includes healing, growth, and the courage to remain open to new connections even after the deepest betrayal. Autumn arrived with spectacular colors and crisp, clear days. The garden yielded its final harvest, and Emily's strawberry plants established themselves, sending out runners that promised abundant fruit the following summer. Vanessa had found steady employment at a local accounting firm, and Emily had settled into her new school, making friends and gradually regaining the carefree spirit that circumstances had temporarily dimmed. The garage conversion project was underway, with contractors transforming the underused space into a comfortable small apartment, complete with a loft bedroom designed to appeal to children. The New Beginnings Board had enthusiastically approved the extended residency option for families with children, and Laura had already identified potential candidates for when the new space was ready. Diana and I had settled into a relationship that felt both grounded and full of possibility. We spent most weekends together, alternating between her city apartment and my house, discovering the natural rhythm of sharing space and time while maintaining our independent lives. We moved forward deliberately, mindful of our respective histories, building trust through consistency and open communication. One Sunday morning in late October, Diana and I were having coffee on the porch, watching as Emily showed Vanessa her latest discovery in the garden. Ladybugs hibernating in a protected corner near the strawberry patch. "She's resilient," Diana observed, her voice warm with admiration. Both of them are. They're doing remarkably well," I agreed. Laura says Vanessa's on track to move into her own apartment by spring, though with the new extended residency option, they could stay through the summer if needed. "And how do you feel about that?" Diana asked, watching me carefully. "About them leaving eventually." I considered the question thoughtfully. "I'll miss them," I admitted. "Especially Emily. But that's part of the program's purpose. To be a stepping stone, not a permanent solution. Success means they move on, become fully independent." Diana nodded, her eyes still on the garden scene before us. "You know, I've been thinking about something you said months ago, about reclaiming your vision of the future." "Oh!" I turned to look at her, curious about this shift in conversation. You mentioned that you were remembering that there are different paths that could include family, just not the way you originally planned. She met my gaze directly. I've been thinking about that too. My heart rate quickened slightly. In what way? She set her coffee cup down, turning to face me fully. James, I love what we've built together these past months. The careful pace, the thoughtful progression. But I find myself looking forward with more certainty than I expected to feel again after my divorce. I look at you with Vanessa and Emily. The natural way you've created space for them in your life without trying to control or direct their journey. And I see the kind of partner, the kind of man I want to build a future with. Her directness took my breath away. Diana, I'm not proposing, she clarified with a small smile. That would be rushing things, and we've been so good about not rushing. But I am saying that when I think about my future now, you're in it. And when I think about family, whether that means children of our own someday or continuing the work you've started here with the transitional housing, I can see us creating that together. I reached for her hand, threading my fingers through hers. I see that too, I admitted quietly. More clearly with each passing day. The truth of my words resonated deeply as I spoke them. The future I had once planned with Sarah, the children we would raise in this house, the life we would build together, had shattered beyond repair. But from those fragments, something new had emerged. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a different vision entirely. One that included Diana with her strength and compassion. One that encompassed the transitional housing program and the residents who passed through it. One that left room for possibilities I hadn't yet imagined. Diana leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently against mine. I'm not in any rush, she said softly. We have time to figure out exactly what shape our future takes. I just wanted you to know that I'm all in, whatever that means for us. I'm all in too, I told her, the certainty of it settling in my chest like a physical weight, substantial and grounding. Later that afternoon, after Diana had left for a dinner with her sister, I found myself alone in the house. My house, the house I had fought for when it represented everything I refused to let Sarah and Mark take from me. Now it represented something entirely different. Not the past I had lost, but the future I was creating. Step by deliberate step. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. When I answered, I found Emily standing on the porch, holding a small pot with a strawberry plant growing in it. Mr. Roundworm. James, she said with the solemn dignity only a 6-year-old can muster. I made this for you. It's a baby from my strawberry patch. I accepted the pot carefully, recognizing the significance of her gift. Thank you, Emily. This means a lot to me. She beamed, pleased by my understanding. Mom said even after we moved to our own place, I can still come back and visit my garden sometimes. And she said maybe you'll visit us too. And Ms. Diana. I'd like that very much. I told her honestly. Good. She nodded decisively. Because you're our friend now. Mom says real friends don't go away just because you live in different places. As I watched her skip back to the East Wing entrance, I was struck by the simple wisdom of her statement. Real connections endure beyond physical proximity, beyond circumstance, beyond the inevitable changes that life brings. They adapt and grow, sometimes becoming something entirely different than what they started as, but no less meaningful for the transformation. I placed Emily's strawberry plant on my kitchen windowsill, where it would get plenty of light. A living reminder of growth, of resilience, of the unexpected gifts that can emerge from the most difficult transitions. That evening, as twilight settled over the house, my house, our house, a house of new beginnings, I found myself thinking about the various forms of revenge. There was the cold, calculated kind I had initially pursued, focused on keeping the house as a way to deny Sarah and Mark the futures they had planned at my expense. There was the more subtle revenge of rebuilding my life without them, of finding happiness they had no part in creating. But the most powerful form I had come to realize was the revenge of transformation, of taking the pain they had caused and alchemizing it into something meaningful, something that benefited not just me, but others who were rebuilding their own lives after betrayal and loss. I had kept the house, but in the end, the house had also kept me, anchored me through the storm of betrayal, given me space to heal, provided the foundation for a new future I could never have imagined in those dark days after discovering Sarah and Mark together. As I sat on the porch swing in the gathering darkness, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the betrayal, never for that, but for the strength I had found in its aftermath, for the life I had built from the ruins, for the house that had become not just a place to live, but a testament to the possibility of recovery, renewal, and unexpected joy. I had caught her in bed with my best friend. I had kicked them both out and kept our dream house. But what I had gained in the process was something far more valuable than property or retribution. I had reclaimed myself, my capacity for connection, my belief in new beginnings. And that, I reflected as stars appeared in the darkening sky above my home, was the most satisfying revenge of all.